Welcome to FlashCore, your sharpest source for daily headlines and deep dives. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay ahead of the curve. It began with a sudden and unexpected move from Washington, one that would send shockwaves across the continent and reverberate through the halls of power in both countries. Overnight, the U.S. administration announced a sweeping set of new tariffs, catching even seasoned diplomats off guard. These new tariffs specifically targeted Canadian goods, ranging from agricultural products to manufactured items, and even everyday consumer goods that had long flowed freely across the border. The most significant blow came in the form of a 10% tax on all energy products, oil, natural gas, and electricity, striking at the heart of one of the world's most integrated energy partnerships. The decision sent shockwaves through both nations, abruptly disrupting a long and storied history of peaceful, mutually beneficial trade. For decades, the US and Canada had prided themselves on being each other's closest allies and largest trading partners. Ottawa responded with swift determination. Canadian officials convened emergency meetings, and within hours the government vowed to impose retaliatory tariffs on a massive list of American goods, everything from steel and aluminum to household products and even iconic American foods. What began as a policy dispute over trade imbalances quickly escalated into a full-blown economic conflict, dominating headlines and rattling financial markets on both sides of the border. The rhetoric from politicians grew sharper, and the public soon felt the sting. Canadian shoppers began boycotting U.S. products, and a passionate Buy Canadian movement surged across the country. Social media campaigns urged citizens to support local businesses and avoid American brands, fueling a sense of national unity, but also deepening the divide. The dispute was no longer just about trade numbers or economic statistics. It became deeply personal, affecting daily life in border towns and turning once friendly neighbors into adversaries. Families with members on both sides of the border found themselves caught in the crossfire, and communities that once celebrated their shared heritage now faced growing tension and mistrust. The U.S. government insisted the tariffs were about fairness for American workers, aiming to protect jobs and industries threatened by foreign competition. But many economists and business leaders warned that such measures could easily backfire, risking a recession that would hurt both countries' economies and put thousands of jobs at risk. Tariffs are a blunt tool, and a trade war between such close partners could end up hurting the very people it was meant to protect. Small businesses, farmers, and factory workers on both sides of the border braced for uncertainty, fearing layoffs, closures, and rising prices. The stage was set for a high-stakes standoff, with the economic well-being of millions hanging in the balance. Negotiators from both countries prepared for tense talks, knowing that the outcome could reshape the future of North American trade for years to come. The world watched with bated breath as two of its closest allies teetered on the edge of a trade war, their actions sending ripples through global markets and raising questions about the future of international cooperation. The question on everyone's mind was clear: how far would these old friends go in defense of their own interests, and could their historic friendship survive the storm? As tensions rose, Canada played its strongest card. Ontario's premier threatened to cut off electricity exports to key U.S. states if tariffs weren't lifted. This wasn't just talk. Ontario powers over 1 million American homes and businesses. States like New York and Michigan depend on this steady supply to keep their lights on. The message was clear: economic pain could flow both ways. The threat jolted energy markets, raising fears of price spikes and instability. It was a bold move, showing that Canada had real leverage in this fight. The power lines crossing the border became symbols of a partnership now at risk. Even if the threat wasn't carried out, it forced Washington to reconsider. Canada, often seen as the quieter partner, proved it could hit back where it hurt. The energy threat turned a trade dispute into a genuine crisis. The threat to cut off electricity sent shockwaves through U.S. border states. News of the looming crisis dominated headlines, leaving millions anxious about what the future might hold. For many, the idea of losing power wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential disaster, especially for those living near the border who rely on a steady supply of electricity every day. For places like New York and Michigan, Canadian power isn't a luxury, it's essential. These states have built their modern lives and economies around the reliable flow of electricity from the north. Without it, everything from city lights to public transportation could grind to a halt, affecting millions of people in ways both big and small. Hospitals, schools, and factories all depend on this steady flow. Imagine a hospital suddenly losing power during a critical operation, or a school forced to close its doors because classrooms are too cold in winter. Factories, too, would face shutdowns, putting jobs and livelihoods at risk. The ripple effects would be felt across every sector of society. A sudden shortage could mean blackouts, lost wages, and even life-threatening situations in winter. Vulnerable populations like the elderly or those with medical needs would be especially at risk. Families might find themselves huddled around candles, struggling to stay warm as temperatures drop and uncertainty grows. State officials promised contingency plans, but replacing Canadian power quickly would be costly and difficult. Emergency meetings were held and backup generators were tested, but these were only temporary fixes. The reality was clear. Finding alternative sources of energy on short notice would strain budgets and resources, and might not be enough to prevent widespread disruption. The crisis exposed a hidden dependency. Canada supplies enough electricity to power over 5 million American homes. This cross-border flow of energy has quietly fueled American cities for decades, making life comfortable and businesses competitive. Yet few realized just how much was at stake until the threat became real. Tariffs or a cutoff could send utility bills soaring and disrupt businesses. Families would face tough choices as monthly expenses rise, and small business owners might be forced to close their doors, unable to cope with the uncertainty and financial strain. The dispute was no longer abstract, it threatened household budgets and economic stability. Economists warned of ripple effects throughout the economy, from higher prices at the grocery store to layoffs in industries dependent on affordable power. The sense of security that comes with a reliable grid was suddenly in question. How did states become so reliant? Geography and economics. Importing Canadian hydropower was cheaper and cleaner than building new plants. Over the years, this made sense for both sides. The US got affordable, renewable energy, while Canada benefited from a steady export market. But this efficiency created vulnerability, as states became increasingly dependent on a single source. The trade fight was a harsh lesson in the risks of deep economic integration. What once seemed like a win-win partnership now revealed its fragility. When one side pulls away, the other is left scrambling to adapt, highlighting the need for resilience and diversification in critical infrastructure. It forced both countries to confront the delicate balance between partnership and security. Negotiations grew tense as leaders weighed national interests against the benefits of cooperation. The crisis underscored how interconnected the two nations truly are, and how quickly that connection can become a point of contention. The lights, quite literally, were at stake. For millions, the outcome of this dispute would determine whether their homes stayed bright and warm, or whether they'd be left in the dark, waiting for a solution that might not come soon enough. The real power behind Canada's threat lies in the North American grid, a vast, interconnected web of power lines and plants. This network stretches for thousands of miles, silently humming with energy, linking cities, towns, and industries across two nations. It's a marvel of engineering and cooperation, built over decades to ensure that electricity flows where it's needed most, no matter the border. For over a century, the US and Canada have shared electricity, making both systems stronger and more resilient. This partnership began with small projects, but quickly grew into a cornerstone of North American infrastructure. Generations of engineers and policymakers have worked side by side, forging agreements and building trust that has stood the test of time. This integration lets regions share power, preventing blackouts and lowering costs. When one area faces high demand or an unexpected outage, others can step in to help. It's a safety net that keeps the lights on for millions, and it's made possible only by the seamless cooperation between both countries. On a hot day in New York, extra power can flow in from Quebec. If a Canadian plant fails, the US can help fill the gap. This flexibility is crucial during emergencies, natural disasters, or even just during peak hours when everyone turns on their air conditioning. The grid's adaptability is a testament to the foresight of those who built it. But this deep connection is also a shared vulnerability. The very ties that make us strong can also expose us to new risks. If one part of the grid is attacked or disrupted, the effects can quickly spread, impacting communities far from the original problem. Disruptions in one part of the grid can ripple across borders, causing instability. A single failure can trigger a chain reaction, leading to widespread outages and economic losses. The grid's complexity means that even small issues can escalate if not managed carefully. Political interference threatens to turn a symbol of cooperation into a weapon. When leaders use the grid as leverage, they risk undermining decades of trust and collaboration. The consequences could be severe, not just for energy security but for the relationship between our nations. Engineers work tirelessly to keep the grid balanced. Politics is their worst enemy. Their job is to ensure stability and reliability, not to navigate international disputes. Every day they monitor countless variables, ready to respond at a moment's notice to keep the system running smoothly. The episode was a stark reminder. Our infrastructure doesn't respect borders. Electricity flows freely, indifferent to lines on a map. Our economies, homes, and lives are more connected than most people realize, bound together by invisible currents. Unraveling these ties is dangerous and difficult. The process would be costly, disruptive, and could leave millions vulnerable to outages. Decades of progress could be undone in a matter of days, with consequences that would echo for years. The grid's strength is in partnership. Threatening it puts everyone at risk. Only by working together can we ensure a reliable, secure, and prosperous future for both nations. Our shared power grid is more than just wires and towers. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we cooperate. As threats escalated, economists warned, in a US-Canada trade war there are no winners. Tariffs mean higher prices for consumers and chaos for businesses that rely on cross-border supply chains. A car part might cross the border multiple times, getting taxed at each stop, driving up costs and killing competitiveness. Companies would cut jobs, delay investments, and freeze hiring. The energy sector would be hit hardest, with higher costs rippling through every industry. Canada's export-driven economy would suffer, but so would US industries dependent on Canadian resources. Any pain inflicted would inevitably bounce back. The looming threat of recession and job losses forced leaders to reconsider. In a globalized world, economic cooperation isn't optional, it's survival. Some Canadians wondered, if electricity could be used as leverage, why not oil? But experts quickly dismissed the idea. Canada needs the US oil market far more than the US needs Canadian oil. Nearly all Canadian crude goes south, not by choice, but by necessity. There's no easy way to ship it elsewhere. Shutting off the flow would devastate Canada's economy, causing layoffs and a crash in oil prices. The oil industry supports hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions in revenue. Turning off the tap would mean disaster for provinces like Alberta. Despite political rhetoric, oil was never a realistic weapon. Canada is working to build new pipelines to diversify, but for now, its fate is tied to the US economic realities limit political options no matter how heated the dispute. Even if Canada wanted to halt oil exports, it's not as simple as flipping a switch. The pipeline network is a tangled web. Some lines even dip into the US before returning to Canada. Shutting down cross-border flows would disrupt Canada's own energy supply. Legally, it's a nightmare. Provinces control resources, not Ottawa, and any federal move would spark constitutional battles. Breaking commercial contracts would trigger billions in lawsuits. The logistical, legal, and political risks make an oil shutdown a non-starter. The pipeline puzzle is too complex for a quick political fix. Canada's energy system is deeply intertwined with America's. Separation would hurt both. The lesson energy leverage is powerful, but using it is fraught with peril. After weeks of brinkmanship, both sides stepped back. Leaders in Washington and Ottawa agreed to suspend tariffs and start formal negotiations. The decision was driven by pressure from businesses, farmers, and a public weary of rising costs and uncertainty. The threat of an energy crisis made the stakes real for millions. The episode exposed deep vulnerabilities and forced both nations to confront their codependence. The shared power grid, once a symbol of unity, had become a bargaining chip. In the end, diplomacy prevailed, not as a victory for either side but for common sense. The prosperity of both nations was too valuable to risk. The return to talks was a reminder: cooperation is stronger than confrontation. The goal now was to find a lasting solution and prevent future crises. The crisis ended, but the lessons lingered. The US-Canada partnership, once taken for granted, was revealed as fragile and vital. Energy security became a top concern. Americans questioned their reliance on Canadian power, while Canadians sought new markets for their resources. The shared grid, a symbol of cooperation, nearly became a weapon. Deep economic ties are both a strength and a vulnerability. Leaders learned that actions have consequences that ripple across borders. The standoff showed how quickly rhetoric can become real-world crisis. But it also proved that economic logic can pull nations back from the brink. The future depends on remembering these lessons: dialogue over confrontation, and shared prosperity over short-term politics. The peace is fragile, but it's worth protecting.